It was an ordinary Tuesday morning when Nathaniel Parker, a young black man in his mid-20s, entered the bustling downtown branch of Metropolitan Bank. His crisp navy blue suit and leather briefcase were all the signals anyone needed to deduce that he was no ordinary customer. With a polite smile, he approached the teller line, ready to handle some important personal business. But what he didn't know was that this routine trip to the bank was about to turn into a life-changing experience, not for him, but for one of the employees working there. Nathaniel had worked hard to get to where he was, the son of Marcus Parker, the CEO of Parker Enterprises, a multi-billion-dollar tech company. Nathaniel had inherited more than just his father's last name. He had inherited the same sharp business acumen and determination that had propelled his father to the top of the corporate ladder. Despite his familial ties to success, Nathaniel was a man who preferred to pave his own path. He had worked tirelessly throughout his academic career, earning his degree with honors, and was now in charge of overseeing a small but growing division at the company. His success had come not because of who his father was, but because of his own abilities and effort. As he stood in line at the bank, he noticed a few people around him whispering to each other, some nodding as they eyed him up and down. It was clear that his presence had caught their attention. Nathaniel didn't mind the attention, he was used to it. However, what caught him off guard was the behavior of the bank teller who was assisting him. The teller, a woman in her early 30s, was named Karen. She appeared cordial at first, greeting Nathaniel with a professional smile. But as their interaction continued, Nathaniel quickly noticed her attitude shift. Her gaze seemed to drop from his face to his shoes, then back to his face, clearly making an unconscious assessment of him. "May I help you?" Karen asked with a forced politeness that didn't sit well with Nathaniel. "I'm here to make a withdrawal," Nathaniel replied, his voice steady and calm. He had the paperwork, ready to make the process as smooth as possible. Karen, however, gave him an appraising look before typing something into the system. A few seconds passed before she raised an eyebrow. "I'll need to see some identification before I proceed with this transaction," she said, although Nathaniel had already presented his ID when he had approached the counter. "Of course," Nathaniel said, handing over his identification again, but with a sense of confusion building in his chest. He couldn't understand why this was becoming such an issue. Karen took a moment to scrutinize his ID. Then her gaze shifted to Nathaniel's face once again. "You don't really look like the type of person who would have this kind of account," she muttered, though just loud enough for him to hear. Nathaniel's expression faltered, the words hitting him harder than he cared to admit. He had experienced subtle racism before, but he had always brushed it off. However, this was different. The way Karen's tone had shifted, the way she looked at him as if questioning his right to be there, wasn't something he could ignore. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" Nathaniel asked, keeping his tone controlled. He wanted to be certain he had heard her correctly. "I just mean," Karen stammered, realizing she had crossed a line, but unsure how to backtrack. "You don't look like you belong in a place like this. Maybe you've confused the bank with another branch." The word stung. They weren't even subtle. The discrimination was clear now, even if Karen was trying to mask it with an awkward excuse. Nathaniel felt the familiar rush of anger begin to rise within him. He had worked his entire life to be treated with respect, to prove that he could succeed on his own merits. And now here he was being judged solely based on the color of his skin. But Nathaniel remained calm. He was used to moments like this. It had happened before, not just in the corporate world, but in every day-to-day interaction with people who believed they had the right to question his presence, his success, and his worth. "I assure you I'm at the right place," Nathaniel replied, his voice firm but respectful. "I'm the one who's confused, not you." Karen's discomfort was palpable as she fumbled through the system again, making unnecessary and exaggerated keystrokes. It was clear that she was stalling, perhaps hoping that Nathaniel would just give up and walk away. But Nathaniel had learned long ago that sometimes you had to stand your ground, even when it felt like the entire world was against you. As the minutes ticked by, the tension in the bank began to mount. Nathaniel could feel the eyes of the other customers on him, their gazes shifting from him to Karen and back again. The whispers began again, some in hushed tones, others more obvious. Just when Nathaniel felt the situation had reached its peak, he heard a familiar voice. "Is everything all right here?" The voice was deep, commanding, and unmistakable. Nathaniel turned to see none other than his father, Marcus Parker, standing at the entrance of the bank. His father was a tall, imposing figure, dressed in a sharp suit that exuded power and authority. As CEO of one of the most successful tech companies in the country, Marcus was a well-known figure in both business and social circles. Karen's face immediately paled as she recognized Marcus. She had no idea that Nathaniel was the son of one of the wealthiest men in the city. Her mistake was about to cost her far more than she realized. I'm just finishing up here," Karen stammered, her voice suddenly higher pitched than it had been moments before. Marcus stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he looked at his son, then at Karen. "What's going on?" he asked, his tone icy. Nathaniel gave his father a small nod, silently indicating that he was all right. "I'm fine, Dad. Just a misunderstanding," he said, though his voice betrayed the hurt he felt. Marcus wasn't one to let things slide, especially when it came to the treatment of his son. He turned to Karen, his gaze unyielding. "It seems that you've made an error," he said coldly. "My son has every right to bank here, and yet you've treated him as though he doesn't belong. You've made an assumption based on his appearance, and that is unacceptable." Karen's face flushed red, and she stammered, trying to apologize. I didn't mean any harm. I didn't recognize him, and I thought." "You thought?" Marcus interrupted, his voice now a low growl. "You don't get a thing for my son. You treat all customers with respect, no matter their background or appearance. Do you understand?" Karen nodded vigorously, clearly panicked. Yes, of course I understand. I'm so sorry, sir. I'll make sure everything is handled immediately." Marcus gave her one last look of disdain before turning his attention back to his son. "Nathaniel, are you okay?" Nathaniel smiled weakly. "I'm fine, Dad. Just another lesson in how some people still see the world." Marcus placed a hand on his son's shoulder, a gesture of both pride and protection. "You're stronger than they'll ever understand," he said softly. Nathaniel nodded, grateful for his father's presence. It was moments like these that made him realize how much he had learned from Marcus, not just about business, but about resilience and integrity. As the two left the bank, Karen stood frozen behind the counter, her face a mix of embarrassment and regret. She had made a mistake, one that had cost her not just the trust of her customers, but her job as well. She would never forget the moment that she had judged someone based on the color of their skin, and it would serve as a lesson she would carry with her for the rest of her life.